Morning, or good afternoon, or no, sorry, it is still morning. Good morning, everybody. I'm not sure where everybody's time zones are, but I'm going to say good morning because that's still my time zone. So today, we're looking at the Generic Supply Chain Hub product, but we're really looking at more focused on how do we leverage data or KPIs within the organizations. And really, a key thing is to improve your accuracy of your supply chain, but also boost the efficiency. And at the end of the day, for companies, a big part of it is reducing cost and really going after the value of how do they make sure that they handle their business in the most efficient way that they can. So from a high level, the session, I'm going to go through some PowerPoint slides because a lot of it's talking about data and stuff, but then at the end of it, I'm going to pop into the product again and just drill into a few different screens and show you a few different scenarios. And if there's some questions towards the end, I'm definitely going to be available to ask anything like that. But really the description of what we're going to be talking about is how do we make sure that we enhance the modern supply chain? More and more nowadays, we're seeing supply chains on a fairly regular basis. Business practices are changing just because what customers are looking for are changing and stuff like that. So really, it's that ability to nowadays be able to look and have some really good visual access to what's going on with your inventory, what's going on with your orders, and then different processes within the organization. So really, the key there is having a good set of KPIs that you can look at. Most systems nowadays are really looking at real time, which we definitely are from a supply chain capability. So really, we're making sure that we have a good tracking and understanding of what's actually happening in the warehouse at all points in times or on the production floor through MES. So we're capturing that data in real time because at the end of the day, we want to make the organizations are looking to make some mission critical decisions based on the data that they're seeing. So if it's not accurate and in real time and stuff like that, it doesn't give them a really good understanding of what's actually going on. And what we've been seeing a lot more in the last few years is a lot more companies. Visual tools are really helping companies really understand what the data is. There's a lot of, the row-based reporting, and I still use it a lot too, which is great. But a lot of, we're finding in a lot of warehouses, really that visualization of what's going on with the data and how do they look at it is becoming very important and becoming very powerful different organizations throughout the supply chain. So really at the end of the day, it's really, we want to make sure that we, provide our companies with a tool that makes them successful, builds their customer relationships, and then just make sure we increase the productivity throughout the supply chain to make sure that they're making more money at the end of the day. So really the agenda that we're going to go through today is we're going to look at the data itself and why it's important. We're going to look at some KPI dashboards. For us, we have what we call a warehouse heat maps, and it's really how do we look at inventory processes, users in the warehouse. Item traceability, this is more for companies who are doing manufacturing, and the best example is food manufacturing, but there's pharmaceutical or anything else where you need lot number, expiry date traceability. And then at the end, we'll just really do that high level overview of, hey, what are different reporting mechanisms and why are they important throughout the supply chain? So when we really jump into it, if we start looking at it from a high level, what's important for us is really going through and looking at the different data. So for example, the first point there, we're ensuring daily, weekly, monthly goals are achieved. And really a big piece of that is really looking at KPIs and measuring stuff. So in other words, we really want to be able to break it down, and it's by different things. From a high level, a lot of times you just think by user. Yeah, very important. But at the end of the day, sometimes it's also, hey, by different processes or by different customers. For example, if you deal with the Walmarts of the world or any of the big trading partners, how are we dealing with their types of orders or what we call picking jobs and stuff like that? How are we being able to produce those and get those out of the warehouse? How many lines do they have on average and stuff? So it's really being able to look at that stuff on a daily and a weekly and then even those monthly goals and make sure what we've been seeing historically, we're meeting and achieving those goals. In some cases, we go into warehouses that already have existing systems. So they've already got a good grasp of what it actually takes in the warehouse and actually what's happening within the warehouse from that high level. But a lot of times when we're implementing, they're just looking for that next level of detail. So for us too, and we got some customers, they don't run systems at all. So everything is paper-based. So for them, it's always very interesting because when they first start off, they get this really good snapshot of, ooh, what's actually happening in the warehouse. So a lot of times it's a good eye opener for them because now they can really see, okay, hey, based on our certain processes, different areas of the warehouse, different personnel in the warehouse, whatever it might be, what's actually going on there. And that's how they're really now able to start, okay, now based on this historical data, right, or just based on this recent data, let's start setting those monthly goals to make sure that we get to where we need to be. Another big one is just ensuring consistency and continuity of it. So really over time, people and the priorities change, right? But the measurement of KPIs should always remain fairly consistent. So KPIs are monitoring long-term strategic goals. So one of the things is, yes, you change your business practice sometimes, and in essence, yes, the KPIs do change from a high level, but a lot of times that standard set of KPIs, in other words, looking at orders, looking at users, looking at different processes, those are always going to remain consistent within the organization, right? You might add a new process or you might add some new users, right? But again, that general ability to just consistently and just consistently look at the data across the board to make sure everything is correct is very important. Another big one is just providing information and feedback. So a lot of times as you're going throughout the day or throughout the week and stuff like that, sometimes there is difference in what happens within an organization. Something might have happened or somebody might be off sick for the day and stuff like that. But really being able to look and providing that information and feedback on what's actually going on within the supply chain is very important. So really you want to be able to look at those KPIs and take that accurate snapshot of what's going on from an overall performance within the supply chain. And again, looking at it in real time and then be able to really effectively make decisions. So sometimes it's as simple as, hey, the UPS truck is leaving at 4 o'clock. If I don't have all my UPS orders picked and staged and loaded and packed or whatever else it might be by 4 o'clock, I'm not going to get them all out by the end of the day. So again, we go back to that concept. If you got customer statistics that are very important to you, and you're saying, hey, as long as you got an order in by 2 o'clock today, we'll have that order out by 4 o'clock today on the UPS truck, right? If you don't have that ability to see and make sure that all of those orders are out by 4 o'clock, right, then that's where you can run into customers phoning up the next day and saying, hey, I didn't get my stuff, and then you got to track down what happened to it. So again, just that ability to provide that information and constant feedback throughout the system. Another big one is really when you look at the systems and the KPIs, a lot of times it's really looking at, hey, how do we educate our staff? How do we make them better and stuff like that? The KPIs are one thing, but then also just trying to identify, through other reporting in different ways, what's going on with the personnel and how do I get them up to par? So if we're starting to look at KPIs and we see certain employees maybe are below what we expect, right, then we can actually use that and educate them through and make sure that we can go through and make them a better employee throughout the organization. So again, sometimes it's drilling down to that truly granular level of what's the employee doing, but also processes sometimes. Sometimes you can find bottlenecks by looking at data and start to understand, oh, well, hey, maybe we've got a certain number of products that are our true fast-moving, high-volume products. And in essence, maybe it's better to split those up into different aisles so we don't getting as much contention, because we see that through certain parts of the day or hours or even weeks, we've got a lot of people always going down these same aisles over and over again, because that's where we store all of that stuff. So again, just the way you look at those KPIs and look at those reports, you can start being able to educate your employees, but also your organization better on, hey, how do we set up the warehouse and how do we make sure that we train those employees better? The last one there, staff morale, and this is not all companies do it, but what we see a lot is the concept of incentives. Right. So from a staff perspective, incentives and competing, it's kind of ingrained to everybody nowadays. Everybody always wants to be the best or beat everybody else. And in turn, with incentives, hey, that's always a great way to do it. So really, again, that concept of being able to track everything in real time, report on everything in real time, and being able to show that information up to the screens is a very important part. Also, what it does is just some of the other tools that we'll talk about and see as we go through here. It just gives you ability, again, going back up to the education part, of who are those best employees, but at the same time also just being able to pick out, maybe there's some employees that maybe we should spend some more time with, make sure we do another training session with or whatever it is, just to make sure they're keeping up with that same level again, and in essence making them competitive with everything else. So now they can all be in that same level of always being in competition for those incentives if you go through the organization that way. So The first group I'm going to talk about is KPI dashboards. So, from a high level, it's in the supply chain or in a warehouse or even a manufacturing facility. There's typically three, I'll call it, main different areas of a KPI that people are interested. So really, it's the inbound, what we consider outbound, and the warehousing. So from in the supply chain, what we talk about the incentives or KPIs for inbound is really looking at, for example, purchase orders or ASN, so in other words, inbound shipments, but also could be customer return orders, and then really the receipts that we're working on. So a lot of times the receipt and the why I have it in orange there, the dashboards that you see over on the right-hand side, those are examples of people doing receipts and what's actually happening in the warehouse. So again, it's that concept of, you know what, based on the organization, I want to be able to see, hey, how fast am I getting trucks, for example, loaded and unloaded? So we can by default, or out of the box, go down to hour. Some people have even brought it down to less time. But for example, by hour, we want to see, hey, what's going on? Because a lot of organizations, for example, they'll have people doing receiving. Sometimes it's either overnight, for example, but a lot of times it's, if they're not doing a night shift, it's definitely during the morning, typically, that all the inbound trucks are coming and you're getting everything in. So again, really having that visibility to be able to say, okay, you know what, hey, we know it starts at 8 o'clock every day or 7 o'clock or whatever it might be. And we are expecting that in theory, we want to see all of that all of that receiving in inbound processes. We're hoping to be done by 10 o'clock or something like that. But again, if you start looking at the KPIs, for example, by hour and stuff like that, you start seeing, oh, you know what, this continually seems to go a little bit longer into 11. And now if you drill into it, for example, by user, now you can start seeing, okay, yeah, there's some people out there that they're doing good numbers and they're really doing a bulk of the receiving and stuff like that. But at the same time, then there might be some other people. It's like, oh, okay, why are these guys, kind of lower in numbers? With that said, you want a lot of different KPIs, because the example there is we might have a few employees, and when we look at their stats, we might go, oh, that's not very good. But if you spin those stats and look at it in a slightly different way, it might be the example of, hey, you know what, we've got somebody who's receiving against ocean containers, or maybe not ocean containers, but let's say domestic freight trucks. And when it comes in, everything is palletized, right? So if we're just looking at pure numbers on receipts, they're just in and out of that truck all day long, right? So in other words, they could have that really high number of receipts and receipt lines. Whereas you might get somebody else and they're more focused on, okay, you know what, I'm gonna be over at a counter and all day long, I'm gonna get, UPS, FedEx, DHL. They're just gonna bring me these expedite orders all day long, right? In their boxes, 1s and 2s packages. So yeah, I still gotta get them in, do it. But in turn, because they're doing a smaller quantity, because the trucks aren't, as full and coming in as consistent as some of the ocean containers or full truckloads, right? Yeah, it's a little less volume. So again, it's important to be able to look at stuff in different ways, and I'll get into it in a bit. But from a high level, for example, we've got 526 different KPIs in there. I'm not even guessing how many are inbound versus outbound versus warehousing, but the key there is with 526 different KPIs on that, even within receiving, there's probably 30 or 40 just separate KPIs of, hey, if I'm looking at receipt or inbound processes, how can I sort that data to make sure that I can see it properly and read it properly? A big one just on the graphs themselves. A lot of times, for example, we use a pie chart, but we can also use stack bar, and then there's the line concept. A little bit later, we'll look at some other ones and stuff like that too, but that concept is, how do we make sure that we represent that data in an easy way to look at the data? So in other words, how is it visual? I'm more of a fan of lines and stuff like that. I kind of understand the stacks, but at the same time, sometimes you got to look at it and figure out, okay, where's all the stacks? So, but again, other people's, their brains process slightly different in the way they look at data. So it's really that key of trying to put the data into a format that is easy to read, quick to read, to make sure that you can make some decisions and have the insight into what's actually happening within the organization. Outbound, I would say, is the biggest one from a KPI reporting standpoint, because at the end of the day, outbound's where companies make their money. So really what I'm talking about there is for what we consider picking, packing, loading, and then the shipping part. So in other words, we really want to be able to focus, and a little bit earlier I talked about UPS as an example. We've got UPS, they leave at 4 o'clock every day. So it's one of those things where throughout the day, we want to be able to kind of monitor and kind of take quick snapshots and, hey, what's actually going on? So nowadays, the one example is we're seeing a lot more managers, for example, using their smartphones. So in other words, they can have that up. They would have the what's considered the BO list, kind of this one little section in here, but they can have that, and that can be one of their default home pages. And as soon as they log in, boof, that's showing that type of information, even from their smartphone. So again, just all day long, they can be doing these checks to see, okay, what's happening within the organization? Is there anything I should be aware of? You know, we can still trigger alerts and do all kinds of other things, but sometimes, yeah, just having that constant check, you know, once an hour, once every half hour, whatever it is, to be able to see the stats on all the different types of orders that are going through organizations. For us, we do quite a few what we consider manufacturing or MES customers. So for them, it's that production process. So it could be the example, warehouse manager has one KPI set or BL list that he's looking at, whereas the manufacturing group has another different dashboard, same dashboard, but different set of default data that they look at based on, hey, what's actually going on with the work orders, how many work orders have been picked, how much output have I done, and stuff like that. So again, just that snapshot of what's going on a regular basis. But again, outbound is typically the big one. That's really where you want to see, hey, what's going on? Are we getting everything out on time and stuff like that? Because at the end of the day, that's where you make our money. But warehousing is another one, and it's very important. And I'll say warehousing typically more drives into the concept of inventory accuracy, because warehousing, for example, includes your inventory counts, right? Different movements, different adjustments that you're doing to inventory throughout the supply chain. So a lot of times it's, again, that concept of sometimes, you know, sometimes people, you'll ask, and hey, do you have a quality issue? And the answer a lot of times is no, we don't. But a lot of times it's the answer because the way they do their QA, they don't really have systems in place that tracks, hey, how many times have I changed a condition of inventory? What are the different reasons, codes that I've used when I've done those kind of changes? So they're not really tracking at a granular level. But with our system, once you've put in that, you start getting that full visibility of, okay, what are all those, you know, adjustments, all those different movements that you do within the warehouse, and different quantity adjustments and discrepancies that you get. So again, a lot of times as you start seeing some of these type of trends, and the high level or the real theory is, over time, that should reduce greatly, because as people get more comfortable with the system and start understanding that we are tracking things and things are being done, a lot of times you see those discrepancies getting lower and lower over time till you get to your point where you're getting your inventory accuracy up to the 99+ percentile, and then there's very few discrepancies that you see within the system once you start getting a good control of the system overall. The next piece here, warehouse heat maps. So in the supply chain, the big thing for us is, you know, we're always talking about, you know, hey, how do we control the warehouse? How do we know what's going on in the warehouse? And a lot of times, you know, during an implementation, yeah, we're setting up and going through and talking through all the different processes, and hey, if we do this, what's the real value and what's the real benefits? So at the end of the day, the keys for us is we want to reduce the number of touches that are done in the warehouse, and we want to reduce the number of travel that you do in the warehouse. And the example with a warehouse heat map is we take a CAD diagram of your warehouse, we lay it out, we design it, we put it into a format where now we can report against it. So the high level heat map is really warehouse related. Now, I'll say the majority of the time, what do people relate that to? Is they're relating it to inventory, which is very important, right? So in other words, hey, I want to go in, drill into inventory, see what's actually going on, see where it is in the warehouse. But you can also get into the examples of, you know what, picking and understanding how the warehouse is laid out and making sure that I have people going to the appropriate locations in the warehouse to pick, and I call it the golden zone in the warehouse, but closest to the shipping doors, right? I want to drive that there because, again, reducing the number of touches and the amount of movement in the warehouse, it's key. Now, sometimes if you look at a row-based file, that's very hard to kind of pick up. But the concept of actually physically laying out your warehouse and then having a heat map of it to be able to say, okay, hey, show me all the locations that have the most picks from them, right? But it also could be, hey, if I've got ABC classification set up and I'm doing inventory counts, and I've got to do all my A movers, you know, once a quarter or whatever. Sometimes what you realize is when you look at the report over time and you're looking at it really from a heat map, is you start realizing, wow, to count those A's, I'm sending people all over the warehouse. So in other words, I don't have this consistent area or zone within my warehouse where I store all that kind of product, right? Now, sometimes what is an ABC classification can vary, but the concept from a supply chain perspective, a lot of times it's based on quantity that you're moving that gives you the A classification. So again, yeah, I might want to always look at it and say, you know what, let's start moving some of this product from, let's say, in these back areas of the warehouse where we seem to be doing cycle counts against it. And it just raises the question, why do we have it back there, right? Why is it sitting back there? With that said, might be a very valid reason that it's back there. But again, just by having the data and being able to look at the warehouse and see what's happening within the warehouse, it gives you a lot of ability to really start making decisions on, hey, how do we look at the warehouse and do we need to rearrange it, for example, to make sure that we're doing things in the most efficient way. This next part is really for us, again, a big part of our customer base is in, for example, food transformation, but other people who are doing some kind of a manufacturing process. And when I say manufacturing, we have some customers that they're full on manufacturing. They right from raw materials through subcomponents through finished goods. But then a lot of our companies also too would do what I consider more light assembly or kitting processes within the organizations. But in both scenarios, and with item traceability, the typical one there is lot numbers, right? So in other words, I really want to be able to track and really quickly identify, okay, if I had a, let's say, and here the example is we sort of started off with a finished good over here, and I put in the finished good lot number or part number and lot number, and then I said, okay, I want to go off and see all of the raw materials and subcomponents that went in to produce that. So very quickly I can identify all of those different ingredients that went into that. In a traditional system, yeah, you've got item traceability, but again, if you don't have it done in a graphical nature, sometimes it's very hard to identify, hey, what's going on? And one of the examples sometimes, and I've done this during some demos, is this same report we actually have in the more traditional row-based information. So a lot of times I'll even just go over to that quickly and show them, okay, well, this is what you would see if you saw a traditional row-based. And the information's all there, but without having that graphical representation of, hey, this is the original finished good, these are subcomponents, and these are the raw materials, through just a row-based report, it's harder to pick up, okay, which are the products that all correspond to them each other and stuff like that. So again, just that graphical nature of being able to report on things very quickly. And for us, like I was saying, this one we search by ingredient, but for food companies, a lot of times it's also the other way around. So in other words, they might have identified a raw material or an ingredient product that had some kind of a quality issue. And that's where they start their search from. So in other words, they say, okay, yeah, I had this raw material and I know its part number and lot number. Now, what I actually want to see is I want to see, hey, what were all the finished goods or subcomponents, but what are all the finished goods that product went into? Because at the end of the day, that's how I want to be able to say, ooh, I now have to identify all the customers that I've shipped this to and be able to very quickly create that list of shipped to by X number of finished goods based on the lot numbers that they had. But the real key is we got that list because we knew the original ingredient that there was an issue with. So again, it's that concept of forward and backward traceability that gives companies that real quick. From a high level, we got one customer in particular that I worked with over the years, and they actually happened to be in our office one day, and a recall issue came up. And literally, Ashley was the vice president, so he was there. They had it resolved before he actually left in the afternoon for his meeting, that they'd actually resolved. I didn't think about asking him at the time, but a few weeks later I saw him again and I asked, Ashley, traditionally, like before us, how long would that have taken? And he's like, Steph, that would have taken 3 or 4 days to go through all the paperwork, to go through all the documentation, to figure out what had happened. But with our system, again, they were able to go through that full process within a couple hours and make sure they'd identified everything, put everything on QA on hold, get their inspectors out onto the line, but also get their inspectors out into the warehouse to make sure all the finished goods that could have impacted were also inspected and stuff like that to make sure they were done. So very powerful tool. And again, it's just that ability with the graphics of being able to let you really quickly identify what are products that could be of an issue. So the next one here, reporting flexibility. I've kind of talked about this a little bit too. It's just for us, what we've just realized over time is the way people think and the way they look at data can change, but also just sometimes the nature of the data changes. So in other words, there's some type of graphics that are better to suit some things than in other ones. One of the examples I like to use is this little gauge here. It's a very simple thing. What's the percentage? But one of the big things in a warehouse, for example, is what's my warehouse utilization? So in other words, how much space am I using? And the example here is we can set up what we call the bin types. So in other words, we can define the volumetric data. So in other words, set up all the cube of all the different locations. And then in turn, we can also say, okay, on item master unit of measure, we can also set up the volumetric data. So the key here is always you have to have the data set up, but that's that concept. If you've got both of those sets of data set up, all of a sudden I can have this very simple gauge, and a lot of times it's right on the home page. So in other words, when the warehouse manager logs in, right off the bat, there's my warehouse utilization. So, you know, am I at my 90+% utilization of the warehouse, or, you know, am I seasonal business and right at this point in time I'm in the low season, so hey, I've only got 60% of my warehouse used, but then sure enough, a week later everything starts being received for the next season. So again, you start seeing that. So again, sometimes the graphics can be very simple, but again, sometimes it's just because I'm very specifically looking for a key piece of information that I just want to have visible and very quick there for me. So again, a metrics one, a lot of times is just a pure number. So there just might be one thing in your system that manager are always looking for. Just show me the number. And for example, a lot of times in production facilities, they just want to see what the total output is on different production lines, right? So, you know, at that point in time, they don't want to see the whole WIP thing. In other words, hey, if I built all the subcomponents, they're just looking for, hey, based on each product that I'm producing today, what is that total number that I've produced and stuff like that. But again, you can get into the line graphs, into different time graphs based on time, but then also different categories. So for example, outbound shipping, right? I want to see all the different carriers, right? So show me UPS, show me FedEx, show me whatever. I deal with 2 or 3 LTL carriers on a consistent basis. Just show me all of those things. So again, it's just that ability to have the different kinds of graphs to make sure that you're getting that information to the users as quick as possible in the most efficient way. And again, in a way that actually is good for them. And one example here too is we've got some companies who don't even go this path. They just say, no, we like the traditional row-based reporting. So again, nothing wrong with that. It's just, again, how do we make sure that organizations and more importantly, the people within the organizations have visibility to data and put it into a format that really makes it easier for them to read and to look at. This is kind of what I was talking about just here, is that concept of reporting flexibility. So even for us, another example is I still, and me, and I know my wife, for example, though, she does it a lot where to her, she loves Excel. Right. So for her, that concept just to be able to export data, get into Excel and manipulate it in there is a very powerful tool. And I know there's a lot of other people out there that are like that. But then also the concept of being able to look at external reporting applications. So we're a SQL-based application. So the example is we have a lot of companies, and for example, if you're using Nav is SQL based too. So sometimes there's that concept of, okay, I want to pull some reports, but I also want some financial. So in other words, some data from Nav related to orders, in other words, statuses within the WMS. So just that ability, again, to have external tools that could report against it. We're seeing a lot more of the next concept there of really doing data exports, but to a data lake, and then having companies' BI tools look at that. So in other words, there we're just saying, you know what, there's a select set of data, and what we actually do is we actually archive it, but we're really archiving that particular data set and saying, okay, let's send it to that data lake that the corporate BI tool is pointing at to make sure that they can look at it. And like I was saying too, the other way is just the traditional row-based reporting, which this is a good example of what we call the order dashboard. And the order dashboard really says, and in this particular scenario, so order dashboard is based on what's in standby, how many active orders, how many outstanding, how many have been allocated and picked, packed. So to me, this is one that actually, even from my point, I like graphics, but for me, this is one of these row-based reportings that I actually like this one because it lets me select a lot of different groups, really slice and dice the data fairly quickly and see it. And again, it's just pure numbers. So again, do I want to be able to drill down and see other things? Absolutely. But again, there are those scenarios where a traditional row-based type reporting system works very well. But again, the key for me is always making sure that based on what your employees are doing and how you guys look at data, how do we make sure we represent that in the most efficient manner? So I'm sort of done here with, I'll call it the PowerPoint part of the presentation. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move over sort of to the product to actually start letting you guys kind of see the product and kind of go through there to give you some of these examples. Sometimes it's nice to talk about theory, but then in turn, sometimes it's just nice to see the interaction between some of these things and actually how the system is working throughout the platform. So here, what I wanted to do, and how are we doing for time? Okay. So here, what I wanted to start with is just from the beginning. What do we do? We're warehouse management, manufacturing execution, then we also do asset management. But the key for us is, where is inventory within the supply chain? So for us, really, typically, and how I phrase it is, what we do is we track inventory from the time it enters the supply chain. If you're a manufacturing company, it would be from the time it enters through production, in other words, consumption and output of finished goods or subcomponents, and then out the back door until we ship it to the customer. So we really have that full audit trail and full visibility of the inventory throughout the supply chain. And going down to that graphics concept, nowadays, and we're seeing more and more of this, not all of our customers still use it, but we're seeing more and more of this, where we have the warehouse mapper. So again, here, the warehouse mapper tool itself this is where we lay out the warehouse. So here, for example, there's locations that aren't on the map right now. I can go over, drag them over and stuff like that, put them onto there, and really set up the layout of my warehouse. So, and this is an interactive tool, and the concept is, sometimes, we'll go into a warehouse, they've given us an original blueprint. We walk through the warehouse and we go, this blueprint doesn't quite match up to what we're seeing. And it's, oh yeah, well, last year or last month or whatever, we moved around some of the racking here and there. So the concept with this, again, it's not set in stone. So it gives you that ability. Hey, you know what? We're going to set it up, obviously, when we do the implementation originally, but then 6 months later, whatever, a year later, if there's changes done in the warehouse, absolutely, as a customer, you can go in, rearrange it and stuff like that if you're comfortable. If you're not comfortable, we'll do it for you. But that concept is, the more a customer can learn about this, if they rearrange their warehouse in the future, they're able to come into this tool and rearrange. And then another high-level concept in here is, you'll see these lines. There's kind of an orange one that turns to red when I highlight it and stuff, but then the pink lines. And what the concept here is, we're trying to help visualize what is the path within the warehouse. And when we say a path in the warehouse, for example, when I send people out to pick, if, let's say, just for example, you're doing e-commerce, I send them out to pick, you're doing a lot of e-com orders, so onesies and twosies, small quantities. I want a single picker to pick multiple orders at the same time. And even if there's the same product on multiple orders, I want them to go to that location once, tell them what the total quantity is, but then make sure that they pick the quantity appropriate for each order into the right boxes, into the right totes and stuff like that. But again, the concept is, here is, we're trying to lay out and say, okay, and for example, the pink could be, hey, this is my, let's say, my e-commerce path. Whereas you could have another path that's set up to say, hey, this is my heavy moving path, or this is my high value path, or whatever, this is my pallet pick path. So the concept here, from a high level, I get a new ops manager in, I want to sit them down quickly, say, hey, go look at the warehouse mapper, take a look at it. This is the way out in the warehouse, and kind of the flow of what the warehouse is. So again, just that graphical tool to help new employees onboard them and figure out what you can do with the warehouse. But what the warehouse mapper is really used for at the end of the day is, here, for example, I'm going into an item master record. So here I've got the item master, right? The item number, the name, description, all of that, different categories, different product classes. But if I drill into this right now, here, originally what I see is the more traditional view of, hey, you know what, here's all my different locations that inventory's in, the different condition and the different quantities in the warehouse. But now down here, if I look at the warehouse view, here where we really start seeing the power is, so now if I hit search, what I'm seeing over here is the different colors. So this is the heat map concept. So in the example here, if I just hover over that orange piece there, so really what it's saying very quickly is, you know what, there's 25 locations that actually have between 1,600 and 2,000. And the quantity that's looking at there is what's called the base unit of issue, or the smallest unit of issue, for example. So, example, eaches, right? So it's just showing that kind of information. And then here, if I just go to 4, right, there's all the locations that actually have large quantities of that. So again, the heat map just lets you drill into different specific pieces of information and drill into them. And then another thing I'll show you, because with this view right now, the concept is you're kind of looking down at the warehouse. So in other words, it's not like you're standing in front of a rack, but the concept here, and I kind of put it this way. If you watch this bottom left corner here, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go into an aisle in the warehouse and kind of hover over a different rack segment. So the concept, if you watch that corner, if I go into aisle number 7 here, and then put my mouse over what's considered rack segment number 3, and now this is the concept is, oh, I'm standing in front of that aisle. So when I do it that way, now what you're seeing in that bottom corner is it's showing you, okay, hey, you know what, for this location in that aisle, it's actually that the inventory is only in one location. So what it is, it's in aisle 7, rack number 3, and it's up in the top level, so the E location, and it's in the first pallet position within the warehouse. So it gives you that ability to granularly go in, take a look, and what's going on. One of the powerful tools that we found, or customers have found with this, is your auditors. Some of our customers that we have are publicly traded companies, so they have to do these full physicals. Even some other organizations that aren't public or whatever, they've still decided for whatever business reason, yeah, we're going to do a full physical on a regular basis. But one of the keys for us is we like to recommend get into more of a perpetual just inventory or cycle counting process and get your accuracy up that way. And one of the keys here is that what we found is they've been using this. So now the auditor comes in, and let's say it's year 1 after the first, after you've been implemented and you've been using the system for, let's say, 6-9 months, the auditor first comes in, you sit them down with this tool first, and you pick a handful of products. And basically, it's, okay, we're going to go out to the warehouse and we're going to, pick 10 different products, and we're going to go find those all in locations, and we're going to prove out to you that our inventory accuracy is good. So the first concept is sit in the office, pick those particular products, identify them out on the warehouse mapper. So on here, yep, here's the quantities, yeah, here's the location, so you write them down. And then the follow-up part is now go out to the warehouse and go to those locations, and from a mobile computer, right, you're going to basically say, and you can search different ways. You can literally go to the bin and scan the bin, or you just put in a part number, which will now say, oh, okay, by the way, go to this location. So different ways of figure out where you're going to go. But that key is, yep, go to those locations that you sat in the office and showed the auditor, yep, this is my accuracy. And then you go to the locations and prove it out to them that, yep, see, do the count. And they do the count. So a lot of times, the first year, they still might end up saying, no, you still got to do a full physical. But that concept is, a lot of times what we found is after the second year, as long as they've been doing those good inventory and just regular cycle counting routines, typically after a second year, even for public companies, they'll waive that concept. Nope, you guys don't have to worry about you doing your full physicals on a regular basis. Another quick one here that I like to talk about is, and I like to point out here, this is a demo database. So when I do this is not what I would expect in a production facility. But the heat map here, again, the key, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is what we call the picking location popularity. So in other words, this is that concept where, yeah, it's showing me the warehouse, but really this one's got nothing to do with inventory. Well, it does too, because again, fast moving inventory, but it's not based on inventory. At this point in time, it's just saying, hey, show me all the locations in the warehouse where I've been sending people to go get inventory. So again, this is a demo database, so it's not, but the example here is, this is my shipping or my outbound processing. So I got my different staging lanes, and I got different packing tables and stuff where I do packing or shipping labels and stuff like that. So in a production environment, what I would typically expect or hope to see after a period of time is the example of all of the first parts of the rows, right, are all identified as the whatever your highest color is, the yellow, or you can have different types of things. So you can use different types of maps or different types of colors, but whatever the highest one is, I would expect those to be closest. And then as I move further back in the warehouse, that's where I would expect to see like lower things, right? But that key is, again, it gives you that ability to kind of look at and say, okay, hey, based on this, what am I seeing, and do I have product moved into there? Another key one for us is just the ability, for example, to have different search criteria and dates. The example there is seasonal businesses. We have a number of customers, seasonal business, and they always get to that point of the year or point of the season. I won't even say year, but point in the season, the quarter of the year or whatever, that, oh, when do we make that decision to, let's say, all the winter stuff? Hey, when do we take all the stuff, because it was winter and all of that stuff was up close to the shipping doors, but now we're slowing down, we're getting into our spring season or our summer season. So now when is that decision? And this is a good example where a lot of times looking at this kind of report will show you that. And the example is just show me the last week, right? So I just want to look at picking location or pick line popularity by the last week. And a lot of times in the seasonal business, again, that's where you start saying, oh, you know what, we're starting to do a lot more picking in the back areas of the warehouse where, for example, we'd been receiving all this bulk overstock stuff for the spring season, but we hadn't been using it because it's truly not spring. But hey, look, this is the week that, yeah, now we make that decision and let's start moving this stuff forward and getting into those locations. So again, just a way of really looking at the warehouse. Another concept from a high level, for example, if you start looking at it, is what we consider just capacity. So again, this is the concept. You need the ability to say, okay, what is my bin location set up, which this, and you'd have to do that if you did this, by the way, but what is that? And then also what's on my item master? So again, just looking at, hey, I just want to see the warehouse, but show me where everything is congested. So sometimes, again, and in theory, typically you want to see as much closer to the shipping doors, right? And then in the very back corner of the warehouse, yeah, that should be the less populated area of the warehouse. So again, just by using the warehouse and looking at it in different ways, you can really start seeing what's happening with it within the organization based on different stats. Now, performance dashboards, this we were talking about earlier. So the concept here again is how do I show it? And for example, what did I pick here? So here in the PowerPoints we had receiving, but here I picked picking. So what I've done is we've got 10 different KPI groups. And then under those groups, right, we get different things. So right now I'm sitting in picking orders picked by user, right? But if I'm just gonna go back to the default here. So here, if I come back here, it could be order lines, right? Pick lines, or pick lists, sorry, pick lines. And again, here you'll start seeing there's different things, for example, by ship to, by ship from, right? By different locations, and those are physical locations within the warehouse, by unit of issue that I'm doing it by, and by users. But here there's, for example, by picking job, by different zones in the warehouse. So this is that key. And like I was saying, over time, just out of the box, we've over time landed up with 526 different KPIs. So in other words, if I'm just looking at picking, I could probably, and picking is probably one of the biggest ones, because again, for most companies, that's important. They want to know what's actually happening in the organization. But if I start drilling into that, and again, and here I'll just hit the by user again. So here, what you'll start seeing is the totals, so the counts, the totals, right, the means and the standard deviation, minimums and maximums and stuff like that. So it really starts giving that ability to really quick. And then what am I here? I'm by days here, but for example, you could do by hours, you could do by week, by month, by quarters and stuff. But again, it's just that ability to select, hey, what do I want to see within the system? And how do I want to, where in this one again by user, so here's all the different users and then their graphs, and for example here there's lines, but again you also could do the stack bar. So again, just really important to really be able to specifically drill into that kind of information. And for us, one of the key things is when you log in as a user, so let's say you're a picker, you log into the handheld, everybody's got their very specific user ID password, right? But that's really what gives us that ability to do it, because the handhelds are doing stuff in real-time transactions. So as they pick, we're tracking down literally to the millisecond of who did it, when it was done, what date and what time it was done. So it really gives you that granular real-time visibility to the organization. Now, another big one for this, and this goes with some of the other things too, is the concept for us is having the flexibility. So one thing I like to point out when I'm talking about this here is right now I'm in what we call configuration. This is not core code that we're changing or anything like that. And where I'm going with this topic is, we know at the end of the day when we go into any organization, and this is the example how we've landed up with 526 KPIs, but we know every organization is going to have a manager or a set of managers, whatever it might be, that have very specific requirements, right? In other words, hey, when we sit down for the weekly meeting or the monthly meeting, whatever it might be, these are the KPIs, or these are the pieces of information that are important to that manager. So how do they want to see it? So the high level concept is, at any point in time, we can create a new group. And so, for example, here we could just, the group could be weekly reports, right? So these are the reports whenever we come into the system, when we sit down for that weekly managers meeting. This is the KPI group that I'm going to click on. And then the concept is, once you've got a group, you actually get the KPIs themselves. And at the end of the day, I won't get too technical on this call or anything, but at the end of the day, what is a KPI? It's a query, right? So the key concept that I like to point out there is, as long as we've got the data in the system, that's always the most important part. As long as the data is in there, the theory is we can build a query, and for some of our customers that have IT departments, they could build the query themselves too. If the data is there, we can build that query. Absolutely, let's go in and build that and make sure that you can report on it. So again, it's not just having the kind of the out of the box core reports that you get. It's also that just ability to say, okay, we've got this other set of stuff that we can always extend out to. And here, just the other one I wanted to show you is the concept here of we just call these are tests because they're all in one group and all in one page, so it's easier to show. But this is the concept, and a lot of times what we do is here we'll just generate some random data and we're in the test database, because when I generate the random data, it just shows you what you would see. But the key concept is here, all of these different types of things, I could use any one of these, what we consider objects, and take them out onto the different reporting pages and actually use these as a different, we call them BL list, but a different section of the page. So now we can report with graphical information of what that data is and what it is. And that goes back to the point too of if I just look at, for example, a screen for us. So if I look at the item master screen for us, so one of the keys here is for us just building the pages and the information. We've got a great deal of flexibility. So again, I won't get too technical here, but again, we can always add more objects or more data to the screens, and we can add more search fields and more columns, or we can remove them, right? So either way, sometimes it's like, yeah, that's not important to me. Let's just remove that off the default page. But again, that key is, even with this more traditional row-based reporting, is let's go through and figure out what is a graphical way to be able to see that kind of information. I know how we're doing for time, 11:45, so we're getting short on time. So I'm gonna just hit a couple more things here, then I'll leave a bit of room for some questions if anybody has. Here again was a concept I just wanted to show you. Again, this concept of the item traceability. So in this scenario, I'd actually gone through and again put in some finished goods, right? Put in some lot numbers, and in this case, I actually did 2 at a time. Right? So the ability to report on this is flexibility. So you could pick a handful of products, whatever it might be. Again, a lot of times you start with one and work your way through. But here I just wanted to show you, right? I could put in multiple products. And in this scenario, I said, okay, it's a finished good again, and show me all of those ingredients. So what you'll actually see here though is, and I've actually gone through it, I've already done it, but I've gone through here, and this one here, for example, 2071, right? This part number, you'll notice here, if I actually check it, you'll actually see there's another one down here. So in other words, this is a concept. Sometimes when I check some of these, right, and this one pops up here, is the same ingredient, for example, could land up showing up on multiple different ones. So in other words, sometimes it's not just a one-to-one relationship, because again, I could have a bag of flour, or let's say maybe I got a tank or a silo of flour, right? And from there, that stuff could be used in 2 or 3 different products. So again, when you're, depending on the way you're looking at it forward or backwards, right, there could be multiple instances. But again, it's just that concept of really quick being able to go through that and narrow down that list of, ooh, what could be the possible culprit or that caused the QA issue. And then from there, as I select them, you'll notice over here, they get added to this list. But here's this concept now is change condition. So what's a condition for us? A condition, the concept is QA on hold. So in other words, I've narrowed down my list. I've selected a few products. I'm going to put them on QA on hold, and then why? So, and let's just say there was some kind of a temperature issue, right? So I do that. I could put a comment in here. And what this is actually doing is this is going to put any of the product in any product, because here we're not showing the exact locations of this product. It's just we're trying to identify the product, period. But now when I do this, what's actually going to happen is I'm doing what's considered a mass update. So in other words, anywhere that inventory with that item number, lot number combination is in the warehouse, it's going to put it all on QA on hold, because now I want my QA person to go off and do their inspections of everything, right, and go through that. So again, very quickly to identify products, very quickly to put them on QA on hold. And then another concept is here, I could generate a report and go out the other, or sorry, create a new report, but also here's the concept of that generate report. And like I said a little bit earlier, this is the row-based view of that. So again, to me, if I look at the graphics, it's not gonna let me move it over. If I look at the graphics, right? If I look at the graphics, we're looking at this, to me, the graphics is much more powerful and easier to read and easier to understand of what I'm actually seeing. But again, we can show you the row-based information, it gives you that. But here, and of course I picked one that doesn't have any parts, but here, delivered items. So this is the key concept, and this would be the example of your recall reports, right? So in other words, I've selected, what did I select? I started from there, okay, yeah. So I started from there, but I picked ingredients, so I should have gone the other way around. But I started from there, I picked them, but now if I'd actually shipped any of these, just because I know we're getting short on time, if I'd actually picked anything from these and shipped them anywhere, here's where I would see, here was my customer, here's a contact name, here's an email, phone number, fax number, if I track all of that kind of stuff, and giving me those details. Now, a lot of times for us, there's typically one of two buttons. It just depends on customers themselves. So one example is we can connect to email servers. So one example is we can check all of those, hit an email, and based on a template of what the message is going to be, we can quickly send a message out to all of those customers, right, that have received that product and tell them, hey, what was the product, what was the lot number and stuff that is part of the quarantine issue or whatever it is. And another one too, if customers, if we're not connecting to their email servers, typically we'll just have another button that basically says print report. Right, so because now in turn you're going to give it to your CSRs or whoever it is who's going to now start reaching out to customers and stuff. And by the way, sometimes it's vice versa, and just by default we don't have it. But I would say, yeah, I don't know. From a high level, there's some other pages, and what I was going to say is sometimes you want to go back and figure out who the vendor was. So in other words, yep, I received these raw materials. This was the item number, lot number. Now tell me, who was the vendor that actually shipped this stuff? So in other words, that backwards traceability, because sometimes you got to go back to a vendor, identify who they are, and get in touch with them and tell them, hey, you guys shipped me some product that had an issue. And by the way, you might want to go backwards within your system too and see who else you shipped that stuff to. So again, that forward or backward traceability, a very important tool. And another quick one, just because I know we're getting short on time, I just want to point this one out. And again, just the graphical nature of things. So just the concept of mapping tools. So here, for example, and it depends on what your selections are. But for example, here, and just again, just a test system. So we've got manufacturing plants, we've got warehouses, right? So I'm just going to click them all. But you'll see there, now what it's done is just through the mapping tool, it's identified, okay, here's all the different plants, here's all the different warehouses that I've got in it. And here, this one was based on a customer that we worked with. So for example, they ship to stores all over the US. So in other words, they've got pin marks for all the stores. But also what you can do, for example, is routes. And I'll say this one's more common, and actually, let me do this, let me do that. So this one is more traditional in the sense if you've got your own fleet of trucks and you're kind of going around. So again, sometimes it's that graphical nature, because sometimes that concept is, hey, maybe there was a storm or maybe, we know there was some highway flooded out. So again, sometimes if you look at it, just a traditional row-based report of, yeah, here's my load and here's all the different stops that the driver is going to go on. Again, powerful, but sometimes just having the visualization of, oh, what is the actual route? Sometimes that's a lot easier to identify of, you know what, during the day I heard a weather report or I heard a road report, and I know there's an issue on XYZ highway or there was a flood or something like that. So I know by quickly visualize, oh, look, that's going to impact this route because, yeah, this route goes from X location to Y location and do it. So again, sometimes just going back to that graphical nature of seeing data and stuff basis a row-based basis, some kind of a graphical representation of what the data looks like can be very powerful. So we're at 11:42. I think everybody's probably just got the hour. So what I was going to say, and I'm not sure how this all works, so I know everybody's just listening, but what I wanted to try to do is just leave the last few minutes here just to see if there was any questions from anybody about any specific topics or anything like that.
Yeah, we do have one question.
Okay.
How do I build a business case for WMS?
Oh, that's a great question. So the high level, so what I typically say there is for me, and this is for me, I think every consultant, every salesperson probably has a slightly different twist on this. But for me, what I typically say is typically there's always one trigger In other words, there's always one reason that a company decides, okay, we need a WMS. And a common one, for example, is regulatory requirements. So, and food, for example, that's why I think we're in a lot of food companies, is because they have to deal with a lot of regulatory requirements, right? They have to, like the FDA's got questions, they want to know this, they want to know that. In pharmaceuticals, right, you get into prescription drugs, or sorry, what do they call it? Yeah, well, prescription or narcotic grade drugs and stuff like that. You know, the FDA, and in Canada, they got the RCMP that control that a lot more carefully. So again, those places have to put in systems. So in other words, for them, that reason is regulatory. Something has triggered the reason why I have to go out and do that. What I typically look at from an ROI case is what is important from a business. In other words, there's always that trigger of why, but then it becomes, okay, what is important? So a big one for me is always really efficiency and productivity are the two big ones. So in other words, a lot of the processes will come back to how do I make sure that my efficiency is there from a picking standpoint. So, and again, I'm not sure exactly, actually, I'm not exactly sure even who you are at that voice, but the concept is different businesses have different things. So the example, e-commerce is a huge one for us because it's easy, a lot of times easy to make an ROI case, because with the WMS, really what we're giving you that ability is to do, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, is the concept of cluster picking. So in other words, we're going to go off, we're going to have a single person go out and pick, let's say 10 orders at a time. And if they got one product that's the same on 3 or 4 of those orders, we're only going to send them a location once, and they're going to pick it and then do that. So, but also the concept is, if I take it to the next layer, is let's say I'm doing e-commerce, but nowadays, you know, we're starting to see a lot more Amazon, Shopify, all these different e-com platforms or order entry platforms. So when I ship something for Amazon, for an Amazon customer versus a Shopify customer versus your own, just your own customer period, right? I might have different labeling requirements. So for example, I ship to, when I ship with it for an Amazon customer, they want me to print an Amazon label that looks exactly like the label that they would print if they shipped it from one of their fulfillment centers, right? So in other words, during the process, I'm making the actual picking process more efficient. So I'm reducing the number of touches and the number of travel that I do, but I'm also producing, for example, customer compliant labels and stuff like that. So I don't have to do that secondary step. And then, for example, we've got a lot of concepts where also, for example, companies that have their own fleet of trucks, as much as possible, we would love to pick and actually create pallet quantities and load them straight onto the trailer. Sorry, I'll just go to that visual just really quickly for you, just so you can get an idea. So here we have the concept of different yards. So the concept here is, and let's say I'm just going to pick on UPS for an example here. So let's say I've got my UPS orders, and let's say a lot of product you have in the warehouse, the product that you actually pick, or I won't say the product, but the packaging that you're picking is the same packaging that you're storing it in. So in other words, I don't have to do any repacks. So, but you also might be a company that does have to repack some product. And that's what I mean, in that scenario, we can actually do both of these scenarios. So, but the one example is if we can pick certain products that all we have to do is slap a UPS label on it and put it in the truck, you know what, we're gonna pick, and then we're gonna tell the picker at the end of the day, hey, what dock door is the trailer loaded up? And then that picker is literally gonna take that full pallet after they've picked and load it straight onto the truck. So they don't even have to do a secondary step. Now, with that said, sometimes high value items, sometimes you still wanna do a packaging or a QA step where somebody is doing a check to make sure that things are correct. But again, that's that balance of productivity versus accuracy, because sometimes you want to be very productive. And the example, though, in that scenario is that means probably your product's not the most expensive product in the world. And if you're off by a little bit, it's not going to be the end of the world to your customers, right? And for example, nuts and bolts industry, right? Hardware, right? If you're ordering stuff by the pound, you know, are you ever going to get the exact number of nuts every time or the exact number of washers and stuff like that every time? And the answer is probably no. So in other words, there's that tolerance. But we got one company, they do microprocessors, microchips, and for them, if they lose a reel of microprocessors, that's literally upwards of $1 million. So in other words, that pick for them is very important. So they have additional steps of processes for us. So yeah, so the outbound, and sorry, just to try to do that. So yeah, the outbound is typically the big part where you find ROI, but another one, believe it or not, is actually inbound, because a lot of places that are manual based is by the time they actually get, let's say an ocean container, for example, we've got a lot of warehouses where we've gone in where we've seen it, where it literally takes them up to 2 days by the time the actual inventory is visible in the ERP to when a salesperson can sell against that. So just right off that bat, every time, like whenever you're doing that, you're losing 2 days of turn time in your inventory. So again, what that impacts is safety stock. So purchasing people end up ordering more because to them, they just think, oh, well, I don't have enough on stock. And sometimes, well, no, you had it, you just couldn't get it received in properly and quick enough that you had visibility to make sure that you could fulfill orders. They just saw, oh, we're missing orders, right? We're not getting it done. So they just go back to a default, oh, let's just order more, thinking that that'll solve the issue. But again, if I can get my receiving process, and a lot of times for us, what we would love to be able to say, and again, this depends on warehouses, but for example, if we can receive and do what's called put away all in one step, right, the better off. So in other words, as I'm taking it off the truck, and then I can take it, tell the people, hey, where to go put it away in the warehouse, put it away. And as soon as that sort of steps are done, we're already updating NAV or whatever the ERP system, but for example, NAV, we're already updating NAV to say, yep, we've got these quantities in the warehouse and it's visible and it's available to sell. And again, sometimes you get exceptions. Sometimes product or companies, a lot of QA, food industry, or actually, well, food, but yes, but pharmaceutical, a lot more time. There's a lot more QA checks that are done. So sometimes that still will slow down a process, but even with that being said, they will still increase that time and be able to improve the number of product turns that they get in the warehouse, and again, utilizing the warehouse in the most efficient manner. Because in one example, and I'm going to use the food industry, refrigerated, frozen, dry goods, right? So for us, the concept of what we call put away. So in other words, as you're receiving, where do we want to put product? So for example, with the WMS also is we're going to make sure we restrict stuff. So let's even say allergens, or let's say kosher product, right? If you get those certain types of products in, we want to store them in certain parts of the warehouse, but we want to suggest, but also in some cases we want to restrict, right? So yep, you can put it anywhere in this zone of the warehouse, but it has to be in one of those locations within that zone, right? So again, it's really, we're just trying to speed up that whole efficiency, but in that scenario, we're also trying to make sure that we get the products in the right location, and frozen is typically the best example. You don't want to accidentally have somebody who's not paying attention drop a whole pallet of frozen goods in the dry storage part of the warehouse and have it get wasted and stuff like that. And another big one for us is just well, inventory turns, but also aging. Inventory aging, I'm always surprised at how many companies always have this back part of the warehouse, whereas if you go over there and you rub your hands over the products, you get about an inch of dust off of it, right? Because they've just got product that's been sitting in there in the warehouse. And it's always surprising to me, because a lot of times the question is, sometimes they've just ordered too much originally and they've just never sold it. But it's always surprising sometimes how much it is. Well, no, it's past its expiry date. We couldn't sell it anymore. And then typically, if you don't have a system, that's just happened because they didn't have that good visibility to how inventory is being rotated. So it just got missed, right? And they just landed up with the stock that in theory they should have been able to sell if they were paying more attention to FIFO and expiry date tracking and stuff like that, but they lost control of that. So they land up with a lot of wasted product that just becomes, at the end of the day, they have to dispose of it at some point in time. So I know it's 12. I don't know if that answered all of your question, and I just don't know how everybody's timeline is, but I just noticed that we've hit that 12 o'clock mark. So I can definitely go on. And as some people, if they know me better, I would go on. But I know it's 12, so I'll ask that question. Is everybody okay for the moment? And if there are more questions, we're definitely free to answer them and help through different scenarios.
Well, Stefan, I think that's the only question that we've had come through today.
Okay. And what I'll do is I'll work with Adriana, and just I know I won't say exactly, but I know the salespeople kind of have a little bit. I'm product and I work with the sales team, but I'll say I'm not truly a salesperson that sometimes has those good spins on things. But I'll see if
Yeah,
Adriana
no,
can get some
Stefan, you did a
information
good
together.
job. I appreciate that. You did a great job of giving some examples. I have my email address in the comments section, and I presume everyone can see that. So if you need a specific ROI for your unique, growth strategies and objectives and unique processes, we'd be happy to talk to you on an individual basis. Definitely reach out, because it's every company's unique.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for your time. Have a wonderful day.
All right, thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thanks. Take care.